Jennifer Watkins lived in Colorado Springs in 1999. In October of that year, she was hired at the Memorial Hospital. A month later, on November 6th, Jennifer did not pick up her children from school. She also did not come home after her shift. This worried her husband and he called the police. Her mom also did the same when she could not reach Jennifer. 2 days later, her body was discovered under a stairwell in an area of the hospital that was under construction. 2 workers found her because they noticed a distinctive smell. Her body was wrapped in plastic and bound with duct tape. The autopsy revealed that she passed away due to blunt force trauma to the head. She had also been assaulted. DNA of the attacker was found at the crime scene. It was stored to be used later. Jennifer's husband, Michael Watson, was interviewed several times and fully cooperated with any requests made by investigators. After an extensive investigation, no suspect was ever identified and eventually the case went cold. Then, in 2017, detectives started to work with Parabon Nanolabs, a DNA company based in Virginia. They used DNA found at the crime scene to develop a composite of the suspect. It was believed that he was about 25 years old at the time of the crime and had blue or green eyes. In 2019, a DNA profile was developed for genetic research at Parabon. Then, in August 2020, investigators were notified of a potential lead of the unknown DNA profile. The person of interest was Ricky Severt. He was 29 years old when Jennifer's life was taken. He also matched the composite pretty well. Severt worked in the maintenance department of the Memorial Hospital since April of 1998. He was looked into in the initial investigation and interviewed by detectives. Severt told them that he was working a swing shift on the day Jennifer's life was taken. Severt denied having ever seen her before. Investigators found that he passed away on November 2, 2001, in a car accident on Highway 94, just east of Colorado Springs. The Colorado Bureau of Investigations conducted an analysis of familial DNA collected from surviving family members of Severt. They determined that over 99.99% of the population could be excluded. Severt could not be excluded. On October 1, 2020, the case was sent to the district attorney's office for review. In December, officials determined that Severt was responsible for taking Jennifer's life. Colorado Springs Police Department Chief Vince Niski said in a statement, "After all of these years, we are grateful to finally give Jennifer Watkinson's family the answers they deserve." 19-year-old Deborah Tomlinson lived in Grand Junction, Colorado in 1975. She was a college student. Deborah was outgoing, enjoyed being around people a lot, loved horses, and was a good student. Sadly, her life was taken in December 1975. Her body was found in her apartment in Belford Avenue. The case was investigated by Grand Junction detectives who gathered extensive evidence. In April of 1976, they exhausted all their leads and the case went cold. In 2020, the case was looked into again. The Grand Junction Police Department partnered with Parabon Nanolabs. They analyzed DNA evidence left behind at the crime scene of the person that took Deborah's life. They processed the DNA and looked at 850,000 genetic markers that allowed them to build a family tree of the attacker. Ultimately, the process led them to Jimmy Dean Duncan. Investigators then asked Duncan's brother for a DNA sample and he gave it to them. After some more testing, Detective Sean Crocker from the Grand Junction Police Department were able to say without a doubt, Duncan is the person that took Deborah Tomlinson's life. At this point, you might wonder, why did the investigators not go to Duncan himself for the DNA sample? The reason they could not is he passed away in 1987. This means that there unfortunately won't be justice, but the case being solved still provides some degree of closure for Deborah's family members. Deborah's dad, Jim Tomlinson, said in a response to the news, "It took a lot of weight off my mind. Still don't know why, but at least I know who." The Grand Junction Police Department has found no connection between Duncan and Deborah. Investigators did, however, find out that Duncan had a family member who lived close to the college Deborah attended. Detectives believe Duncan was visiting his relative, and this is how he possibly encountered Deborah. "59-year-old Wilda Wilkinson lived in Bangor, Michigan in 1986. She was a hard-working and loving person. One day when she did not show up for work, her employer called her 2 daughters to hear if one of them knew where she was, but they did not. One of the daughters then found Wilda's lifeless body on the floor of her home. she had been strangled. It appeared to investigators who arrived on the scene that a break-in took place. Detectives collected DNA evidence from an unknown man at the crime scene in her home. Despite investigators' best efforts, the case went cold for many years. In 2010, the case was looked into again. This time, investigators were able to eliminate some people associated with the case and got useful statements from witnesses. In March 2019, investigators traveled to California to question a man by the name of Leon Curry. He had served about 27 years in prison for an assault in an unrelated case. Curry had been a person of interest for quite some time because he lived in the same area as Wilda and committed a similar crime. When investigators talked to him this time, he confessed to taking her life. Since a lot of people make false confessions, investigators decided to use DNA testing to make sure what he said is true. His DNA did not match the DNA of the unknown offender though, and he was ruled out. Investigators were not done with the DNA they collected back in 1986, however. They entered it into a DNA database and found a match. Using the DNA technology, they identified 50-year-old Robert Waite as the person who took Wilda's life. When investigators went to talk to him, they found him serving time in a Florida prison for unrelated kidnapping and battery charges from 2007. In August of 2020, he confessed to the crime. In October, he was sentenced to 25 to 60 years. He was just 16 years old when he ended her life.